Today is Pentecost, and as always, we read from Acts 2, the story of that Pentecostal gathering in the upper room where Jews from all over the world were gathered. And suddenly, the building shook, and the Holy Spirit descended. The same Holy Spirit that was upon Jesus earlier in Luke 4, when Jesus preached his first sermon. The Spirit of God is upon me to preach. That same Holy Spirit descends, and people start preaching. And people, even though they're speaking different languages, everybody, there's simultaneous translation, everybody understands. People are speaking funny, people are hearing funny, all because the Holy Spirit has descended. A crowd gathers in the street out front, and the mob in the street says, those Christians are doing the same thing they did when Jesus was with them. They're drunk, which is an interesting first charge to make against the early church. And Peter comes out and he preaches. Peter, you remember where we left Peter in the story back on the night before Jesus is crucified, when the soldiers arrested Jesus? Peter was in the courtyard. A maid came and said, you were also with the Galilean. And that night, Peter could not find his voice to make any kind of testimonial. He denied Jesus 3 times. Peter now preaches. Something has happened to give Peter, the coward, to give him a voice. And he goes out to the mob in the street and he says, we're not drunk yet. It's only 10 in the morning. Dubious argument there, but Peter says, no. All this speaking that you're hearing, this is what the prophet Joel foretold. In the Old Testament, the Holy Spirit descends on just a few individuals. We call them prophets. And prophets are people who tell the world the truth about God. Well, in the earlier days, the Holy Spirit just fell on just a few prophets, Amos, Jeremiah, Isaiah. But there will be a day, says Joel, when I'm just going to lavishly, effusively pour out my Spirit on everybody. And old people who've stopped dreaming about the future are going to dream again. And young people, young adults who feel that they're graduating in a world up against a wall, no future, they're going to be visionaries and see visions. And your maids and your janitors and people who never get to go to the microphone, people who are never asked their opinion at a meeting on how things ought to go, they're going to get to be prophets too. When I pour out my Spirit, everybody is going to get to preach. Everybody is going to tell the whole world about the mighty acts of God and who God really is and what God is up to in the world. Everybody will be a prophet. And that day is now. And Peter, as if to demonstrate, Peter preaches. It's the Pentecostal outpouring of the Spirit that enables people to testify. And from this story, the church just explodes into the Mediterranean world. This cowardly group of apostles hunkered down behind locked doors. We talked about that a few weeks ago. Now they just explode. And these ordinary, uneducated, none of them had an MDiv degree, people spread the news. They are sent from this place into the whole world. And this is a story about you also. The promise, Peter says, the promise is that the Spirit will be poured out on everybody, not just a few theologically, spiritually motivated people, but everybody will find the words to tell people the good news of who's in charge and who God really is. Everybody will be sent out to preach. We United Methodists practice what is called a sent ministry. That is, you can't hire a Methodist preacher. They've got to be sent. I've been here this year, sent by the bishop. A pastor is following me, Heather, that is being sent by the bishop. But in a sense, Pentecost says all ministry is sent. That everybody you're doing what you're doing in the world, and you're talking to other people about the good news because you've been put there, you've been sent. Which leads me to a story. I've already told you this story before, but Ann Hall has been harassing me to tell it again, and she says it fits so perfectly with Acts 2. So I was doing time in the 6th grade at Donaldson Elementary School when the dreaded announcement came. The teacher said, "William, you go to the principal's office. Go to see Mr. Harrell." And the whole class just froze. And I got up from my desk. Oh no, the principal's office. I trudged out of the room, waiting the certain and sure bad fate that awaited me. Trudged down to the office. I went past other open doors in the rooms, and kids looked out at me like, oh, thank God it's not me, it's him, going down to the principal's office. And I went down there, this large woman that kept guard of the telephone at the principal's office. She said, "He's waiting to see you. Go in there." And Mr. Harrell was behind his desk. And he didn't look up, and he said, "Willimon, Williamson, whatever. Listen carefully. I do not intend to repeat myself. I've got a message I need delivered. Listen carefully. You go out to school, you take a left on Tyndall Avenue, you go down 2 blocks, and then you take a left on Oak Street. And I want you to go down to house number 9 on Oak Street. And I want you to tell Jimmy Spain's mother that if she doesn't get her son to school today, I am going to charge her with truancy. You got that straight?" Jimmy Spain, the worst kid in the 6th grade. He was supposed to be in the 8th grade, but he had been held back so he could beat up more people on the Donaldson Elementary School ground in the 6th grade. Jimmy Spain, oh no. I walked out of the principal's office. I walked down the steps. I walked down Tyndall Avenue thinking, what in the world is truancy? I made it to Oak Street. I paused, took a deep breath, took a left, went down Oak Street to number 9. And there, house number 9, I looked in the yard. It was strewn with broken furniture, stuff overgrown with weeds. It looked like the kind of house Jimmy Spain would probably live in. And I walked through the broken gate, down the walk, up on the rotting steps, politely knocked on the door. Suddenly the door flew open, and a woman was standing there in a bathrobe, even though it was 10:30 in the morning. And she said, "What do you want?" And I said, I've been sent by the principal, Mr. Harrell. And she said, "What does that old fool want?" And I said, and I looked, and there was Jimmy peering out from behind his mother's bathrobe, and suddenly he didn't look like Jimmy always looked on the school. He looked small. And he was peeking out from behind his mother's bathrobe, and I said, the principal said that like today is a very special day at school, and we're doing some special things, and everybody's disappointed that Jimmy is not there, because we're doing a lot of stuff that if he's not there, it just won't be the same. And so I was sent down to see if Jimmy could come and to school. And Jimmy looked amazed. His mother said, "You want to go to that old school today?" And he nodded silently. And she said, "Well, go get the dollar off the dresser and you can go." And he left. He was back in a flash. And so we walked out. We walked out on the porch and down the steps, wordlessly. And we walked back down Oak Street, back toward Tyndall Avenue. And we didn't say anything. It was like he was begging that I wouldn't say anything, that was enough. We walked down Tyndall back to the school, and I delivered him at Mr. Harrell's office. And when I did, he looked back at me with this sense of, I think it was gratitude. And that evening at supper, I told my mother about my experience at school. And my mother said, "That is the most outrageous thing I have ever heard in my life. You mean the principal sent a young child out in the middle of the school day, out into the city with a message? That is outrageous. I am sure that's against all the rules. That is just terrible." But even then, I was just 10 years old, but even then I knew my mother was wrong. That was the best day I had at Donaldson Elementary School. It was the first time I'd ever had the experience of anybody trusting me with a message. It was the first experience I ever had of somebody not getting the news unless I delivered it. And looking back, it was training for a day about 20 years later, when this large bishop laid hands on my head and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit to preach the word." And he said, using those ancient words of the ordination service, "Listen to me. I want you to go out, go down Tyndall Avenue 2 blocks. I want you to take a left on Oak Street, go down to number 9, because God's got a message, and you are the one that's going to deliver it." Amen.